Morning church, welcome to another week of online church services. I thought I'd mix it up a bit this week and give you guys a different perspective of the church, considering how long it's been since most of you have been even able to set foot in this building. As I'm sure you're aware, the next couple of weeks are going to be pretty big for us as a state as we begin to transition back to freedom. What that's going to look like for us as a church is still a bit vague and complicated. So please keep your eyes and ears open as we communicate with you what the future is going to look like. I spent hours and hours poring over information, ideas, thoughts this week as we seek to come to a place where we can understand what is both right, God-honouring and respectful to our government. So please keep us as a church leadership in your prayers as we're going to be hopefully making a decision in the coming weeks as to what reopening our services and reorganising ourselves kind of looks like. As I'm sure you're aware, next week we're actually going to start a new series in the book of Esther. It was originally going to be 7 weeks, but this week I've decided to expand it out to 8 because next week we're actually going to do an overview sermon of the whole book, so that it hopefully gives us a perspective of how the whole book of Esther works together before we jump into the 7 individual segments that we're going to look at in the book. This Sunday, though, we're going to be part of something much bigger than just our church. We're partnering with International Justice Mission, IJM, to participate in Freedom Sunday. It's a Sunday where churches from throughout our nation and throughout the world actually come together to recognise the injustice that still exists in our world today. And we recognise, as we read the Bible, that our God is a God of justice. One of the things that he came down so heavily on Israel repeatedly was their injustice. So we as a church should be a people who reflect God and reflect his desire for justice. To open up to share with us today, actually, is going to be Reverend David Groenenboom, who many of you will know. He's led us last year in our Freedom Sundays, and he's going to be preaching for us again today. He is the Director of Church Partnerships at IJM, and he's also a member of Wamberal Christian Reformed Church. So Dave is going to be sharing with us today, and hopefully you will see me again next Sunday as we begin our series through Esther. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave now. Have a great Sunday.
Well, as we gather together today, parts of our country are in lockdown. People are working from home, they're homeschooling their children, they're unable to visit loved ones, they're only shopping for essentials, they're wearing masks, and we're queuing up for the jab in record numbers. Now, obviously, we're doing all of this to protect ourselves. We need this protection because the virus is our enemy. Worldwide, 190 million people have been infected and over 4 million people have died. In Australia, we've had almost 50,000 cases and nearly 1,000 deaths. And the federal and state governments are spending billions to get on top of the effects of this pandemic. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing it because there's a battle going on. And when there's a battle going on, you need protection. And with today being Freedom Sunday, we need to talk about a more sinister battle, an insidious form of oppression that we rarely see, an unseen battle of horrific proportions, where millions of people are being attacked day after day after day. And one of those people is Dom. As an impoverished farmer in rural Cambodia, Dom battled to provide for his family, even just to put meals on the table. And one day a visitor came to Dom's village and made an offer that Dom couldn't refuse. Dom could travel to Thailand, he could work on a fishing boat, and he could make more money than he ever would in Cambodia. And so Dom agreed, hoping that it would open up a new door to a new reality for his family. So Dom reached Thailand, but the moment he got on the boat, everything changed. Dom came to the horrible realisation that he'd been sold into forced labour slavery. So, what is forced labour slavery? Well, it's where vulnerable people are promised work and they're trapped and they're trafficked into numerous unskilled industries. Forced labour isn't just poor employment conditions. Forced labour is a criminal enterprise. Dom wasn't paid. He could never leave. He was forced to work sometimes 19, 20 hours a day. And that boat travelled thousands of kilometres out to sea, well beyond the reach of help or hope. Dom was trapped in horrendous conditions. He had to work even when he was sick. Any mistake would draw a beating from the master, and some were even thrown overboard as punishment. So Dom lived in constant terror and fear. He didn't know whether he would make it to the next day. He didn't know whether he would ever see his family again. And this unspeakable torture continued for 6 long years. Now, we might be horrified to realise that it's not just Dom. There are 40 million people trapped in slavery today, even as we speak. And they're not just on fishing boats. You'll find them cutting wood, you'll find them in rock quarries, in brick kilns, in snack factories, in silk production. This kind of slavery easily taints some of the things that might even find their way into our own markets and into our own homes. Things like hardware, clothing, chocolate, tuna, fish products, technology. And then there's the abhorrent reality of online sexual exploitation of children, or OSEC, as we call it in the Philippines, where Australians are virtually leading the way when it comes to the consumption of this horrible material. Now, this kind of slavery and oppression is one of Satan's tools to destroy precious human lives, people created in the image of God. See, we're not just fighting bad people or broken systems. This is a battle of spiritual proportions. And so when we stand against this as the people of God, we're actually engaging in a form of spiritual warfare. That's why on Freedom Sunday, we're thinking about what Paul writes in Ephesians 6. He says, "Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Now, it's true. When we read that phrase, the devil's schemes, here in Ephesians 6, it refers to more than matters of injustice and slavery and violence against those who are poor. Absolutely. But we also know, don't we, that right from the start, right from Eden, the devil has been out to destroy men and women and boys and girls. And that's why in that additional passage in Mark 5, the demon-possessed man would live day and night amongst the tombs. He'd be crying out. He'd be cutting himself with stones. And so this is the thing. The devil will use any scheme he can to destroy people created in the image of God. And what could be more horrific than a global industry worth $150 billion per annum? An industry specifically designed to destroy the lives of others. An industry that Dom was caught up and trapped and enslaved in, locked up for 6 years on the high seas. And right now, with COVID and the pandemic the way it is, people are more vulnerable than they ever have been before. It's harder for investigators to get out and find those people who are trapped and enslaved. It's harder for courts to meet and to hear the cases. It's harder to put violent criminals behind bars. Really, friends, the need has never been greater. And that's why, right now, God is calling us. He's calling us his people into this battle. He's calling the church to take a stand to end slavery. He's calling you to stand up for the helpless. He's calling you to speak up for those whose voice can't be heard. And it's nothing new. When you read through the scriptures, you understand that God has always called his people to stand up for the poor and the widow and the fatherless and the oppressed. And so today, if we're going to step into this battle, we're going to need protection. We're going to need the armour of God. We're going to need his complete provision for all we're called to do in this fight. That's what Paul says, isn't it? Ephesians 6 from verse 13. Therefore put on the full armour of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. And in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation, take the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. Now when you hear that, it couldn't be clearer. God wants us to put his armour on and to take a stand. But here's a question. How do we know that we're supposed to use the armour of God in this battle against slavery and injustice? Well, we know it because that's what God himself does. Back in Isaiah's day, the people of Israel thought it was okay to just concentrate on worship, just concentrate on being the people of God and ignore justice. Ignore what was happening to widows and fatherless and the oppressed in their own community. People were crying out for justice amongst the people of God, but God's own people were doing nothing. How could that happen? How could it be that when God had called his own people to seek justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with him, how could they just let injustice and violence rule their streets? And when God saw what was happening, he was livid. He was so angry that Isaiah uses some of the most powerful language that we ever hear from God's mouth. In Isaiah 59 we read, "Truth is nowhere to be found, and whoever shuns evil becomes prey themselves. The Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice. He saw that there was no one, and he was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So his own arm achieved salvation for him, and his own righteousness sustained him. He put on righteousness as his breastplate, and the helmet of salvation on his head. He put on the garments of vengeance and wrapped himself in zeal as a cloak." You see, God sees injustice, sees his people ignoring injustice around them, and he's so appalled. He says, "I'm so appalled that my people are doing nothing to address this. So I'm going to put this armour on myself and I'm going to get the job done." Now, remember, Paul was a renowned Pharisee. He had memorised the entire Old Testament and much, much more, committed it all to memory. And he would have had those gross injustices of Isaiah 59 running through his mind as he penned these words about the armour of God in Ephesians 6. And so today, as we are called to be imitators of God, we as the church today can only take our stand against injustice as we wear the armour that God has provided. And it's a good thing, because we can never win this battle in our own strength. We will never win our own victory. We battle in the power and the protection of Jesus, who in his cross and resurrection has already won the decisive victory. Listen again, in Ephesians 1. His incomparably great power for us who believe is the same as his mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms, far above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every name that is invoked, not only in the present age, but also in the age to come. As we engage in the battle to free those who are captives, as we meet the waves of injustice that are coming towards us, as we seek to extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one, God says to us, put on my armour, church. Church, take your stand against the devil's schemes. And we will stand. In Jesus' resurrection power, we will stand and will fight. And in his name, we will see victory. In his armour, we will set captives free. Captives like Dom. One day, the fishing vessel that Dom was trapped on was seized by Indonesian authorities. Dom and the other men from Cambodia were allowed to return home. So Dom returned home, and to his horror, he found that his own son had been deceived and trafficked by the very same people who had deceived him. Now, in time, the Cambodian police introduced Dom to international justice mission. We'd been working in the region to break down some of those trafficking rings. And as IJM interviewed Dom and others, we discovered that a network of traffickers had been operating in that area for nearly a decade. Authorities eventually arrested 3 key players, and with IJM's support, Dom testified in court, and those 3 traffickers were convicted. And thankfully, his son was released and returned to home as well. And Dom later confided how proud he was to stand up against the injustice that had been perpetrated on him and on others. He felt it was the first time in his life that he'd been able to do this. And so today he can live in freedom, and he can see his family growing up around him in safety. IJM continues to build bridges between law enforcement entities in the region. We continue to dismantle trafficking networks across Thailand and Cambodia and Myanmar. And by the following year, we had seen 8 additional convictions of traffickers who had abused people like Dom and his son and others. So it's true. Our struggle is not against mere flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil, of destruction, spiritual forces of injustice. But in God's armour, we can join the battle. In God's armour, we'll stand for those who are bowed down and oppressed. In God's armour, we'll speak up as Jesus' own Spirit works through us. We will speak up for those whose voice cannot be heard. So today, people of God, stand. Stand as one church, united to end slavery. And one of the most effective ways that you can do that is to support our mission by becoming an IJM Freedom Partner. You can just follow the QR code on the screen, or you can fill out the card that you've been given in your church service. And here's the thing, when you become an IJM Freedom Partner, you actually become part of the rescue team. As an IJM Freedom Partner, you'll be praying regularly. You'll receive a brief email update telling you about all the tremendous things that IJM is doing all around the world to end slavery. As an IJM Freedom Partner, you'll be giving monthly. Your monthly gift of $31 or more is the most concrete step you can take to end slavery right now. Every gift, every Freedom Partner allows us to stand up against the powerful of the world who will prey on the vulnerable. And friends, it's going to take an army. It's going to take God's army, a movement of churches all clothed in God's armour to lead this nation to become a leader in ending slavery around the world. Become a Freedom Partner with us today. And if you're already a Freedom Partner, you can use the same link just to give a one-off special Freedom Sunday gift to IJM. And as we've mentioned, the need has never been greater. So as we make these commitments, let's stand together. Let's put on God's protective armour. Let's fight as one church, united to end slavery. Let's stand, seeking justice and freedom for all those who are oppressed by slavery right now. And let's do it all to the glory of our great God, who hears the cry of the oppressed. Let's do it all for the glory of our Saviour Jesus, who has rescued us and won our freedom.